Um, Years ago, in fact, it was so long ago that Karen and I had just started dating. We just celebrated our 20th anniversary. So it was a long time ago. We were both living in Western Maryland, and I had a thing I had to be at in Philadelphia for the evening, and so I came to Philadelphia alone, and I was planning on going right back after my thing so that I could have breakfast with my new girlfriend in Western Maryland. So the thing was over, and I got my car, and I knew I needed to get on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. This is the days, of course, before GPS. And so I did get on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. I just got on the northeast extension of the Pennsylvania Turnpike, which is a totally different thing if you goes up to the Poconos, not out west. And I don't know if this is true today. I haven't been on the northeast extension in a long time. But in those days, coming out of Philadelphia, the first exit was over 20 miles off of the entrance. And so I had to drive. It was like midnight. I have 2.5 hours of driving ahead of me. And I drive 20-some miles out. I get off the first exit. I get back on. I drive 20-some miles back. 40 minutes later, I'm coming off the northeast extension of the Pennsylvania Turnpike and getting on the actual Pennsylvania Turnpike. And I'm thinking to myself, I've already been here tonight. I've already been here. I feel I've been driving for 40 minutes, and I've gone nowhere. I'm sure none of you have ever done anything like that or missed your exit or something like that. I seem to do it frequently. Our gospel lesson, our Old Testament lesson today comes from Isaiah chapter 40. Isaiah can be roughly broken down into 3 sections. The first section is a rather angry section where Isaiah is railing against the people of Jerusalem for their wicked living and saying that if they don't stop what they're doing and turn around, something terrible is going to befall them. It's a section of warning. And then the second section of Isaiah, where this reading comes from, is after this terrible thing has already happened. And they've lived through the terrible thing, and they're continuing to live through the terrible thing. And so the second section of Isaiah is much gentler. In fact, you can hear it in these words, "Comfort, oh, comfort my people." You don't hear words of comfort in the first section of Isaiah. Isaiah is very angry and upset. But here, to these people who have already been beaten down, he preaches comfort. The Lord is like our shepherd. He will feed his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms and carry them in his bosom and gently lead the mother sheep. Everything will be okay. I've said this before. I think it's one of the cruxes to understanding the Hebrew Bible at all, is that while the horrible thing that happens to them is Babylon destroys Jerusalem. King Nebuchadnezzar comes, just levels Jerusalem, kills most of the populace, and takes the survivors off to Babylon to be slaves, and they're there for 70 years. So the horrible thing is they lose their entire homeland, they lose their way of life, they lose their homes, they lose many of their friends and neighbors and family members. Can you even imagine? This is why Isaiah to these beaten down people says, comfort, comfort. God will carry us like a shepherd. While the Israelites are in Babylon for these 70 years, they don't have all of the religious and spiritual structure that they had while they were in Israel. While they were in Israel, they had a temple, they had a priesthood, there were prayers going all day long, there were sacrifices going on all day long, the shofar was blowing all day long, their religious life was going, and every once in a while they could go and tap into it. But Once they lose Jerusalem, they lose the temple, they lose the priesthood and the sort of the religious professionals who keep religion going, and they're just in Babylon without any of that structure. They either were going to lose their spirituality, they were going to lose their spiritual connection with God, or they had to develop a new structure to base their religion on. And so what they did was they focused on the Word, the Scriptures. In fact, a lot of what we know as the Hebrew Bible was written. The stories were finally written down while they were in Babylon, or the stories that had previously written down were edited in Babylon. A lot of what we know as the Old Testament today comes out of the people of God sitting in Babylon, reminding each other of their story and preparing the story so that the story could be told to future generations, so that not only would they not lose their spiritual connection with God, but their children and their children's children wouldn't. We got to tell the story, they said. One of the sections that was written while they were in Babylon, written and edited, is what's called the primeval history, the first several chapters of Genesis, which is the story of creation and the story of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel. And then eventually, the 11th chapter, we get this strange little story, which we all remember from Sunday school, I'm sure, the story of the Tower of Babel. Remember this? Everyone's living in Babel. They decide they're going to build a big tower, and God confounds their speech, and they all go their separate ways. Babel, they're writing the story in Babylon, and they're writing about Babel. You may know this. Babylon and Babel are the same place. It's the same thing. And so what they were reminding themselves of and telling their children is that here we are in Babylon, and we've been here before. Something maybe 2,000 years have passed. 2,000 years have gone by, and we haven't gone anywhere. It's like me traveling up the Northeast Extension, and 40 minutes later coming back to the same place I already was. We're back in Babylon. Another section, major section of the Hebrew Bible that was written and edited in Babylon was the story of the Exodus, the story of the last time they were not in their homeland and were slaves to a foreign king in a foreign land. It's like, we've been here before. We used to be slaves in Egypt, now we're slaves in Babylon. Over 1,000 years have passed, and we haven't gone anywhere. It's like we're spinning our wheels. Can you relate at all? Every so often, don't we have the realization in life because something comes up, or we make a decision, or something happens to us and we end up doing the same thing, experiencing the same thing, having the same argument, seeing the same issue again? Didn't we already do this? Didn't we already get through this? I've been traveling all these months and all these years, and here we are again. It can be a crushing feeling if you let it in, to look at life and just feel like we're just spinning our wheels, which is why I think Isaiah writes these luscious words of comfort to these people who were probably beating themselves up for where they have found themselves. Comfort, oh, comfort my people. He will gather us, the lambs, in his arms and carry us in his bosom and gently lead the mother sheep. I think there's a reason why. I can never hear these words, by the way, in Isaiah chapter 40 without hearing the soundtrack of Handel's Messiah sort of playing in the background. I'd sing it for you now, but we're not allowed to sing. But perhaps you have that soundtrack going on. This 40th chapter of Isaiah inspired Handel to write 4 pieces of the Messiah. 4 different songs of the Messiah come out of this chapter. It is so lush, trying to give his people comfort who felt like they were spinning their wheels, trying to give us, God's people, comfort who may find ourselves time and time again spinning our wheels and in the same spot. There is another place in today's lessons where we end up going back to the same spot. In fact, it's the more prominent example of this. In the gospel lesson, we're in the very opening verses of the Gospel of Mark, the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ. And Mark begins his gospel with the story of John the Baptist, who is preaching right out of Isaiah 40. See, I'm sending my messenger ahead of you. And then Mark tells us that all the people of Jerusalem and people from the whole Judean countryside were going out to him. Everyone's going out to River Jordan. Not because the River Jordan was particularly close. It was probably a day's walk away. Not because it was the only water source around. It wasn't, obviously. There were plenty of water sources. But John specifically began his ministry of baptism at Jordan River. About 1,000 years prior to John the Baptist gathering all the people at Jordan River, the Jordan River was the place where the Israelites came into their homeland. We all know the story of the Exodus. We know the splitting of the Red Sea. People walk out of Egypt into the wilderness. They walk in the wilderness for 40 years. And then at the other end, we sometimes forget that there was another body of water in their way. First it was the Red Sea. Now, on the other end of the journey, it's the Jordan River. How are the people going to get across the river? And God, just like God split the Red Sea, God split the Jordan River so that the people could walk through on dry land and go into their homeland. For the first time, they are a free people with their own land. For the first time in their collective memory, they are a free people with a home. And so when John gathers them there for their baptisms and Jesus' baptism, they've been there before. But I don't think this is one of those, I've been there before. Sometimes when we find ourselves in life that we've been there before, it's a crushing realization. But sometimes there is meaning behind it. Sometimes we're able to see something that God, I think, wants us to see. That for these people going to John, they were reminding themselves that here we found a home. And here we remember what God did for us in ages past. And here we remember what God is doing for us now. When we find ourselves spinning in life, we can be crushed by it, or we can recognize that the last time I was here, God was with me, and I made it through. And the time before that, God was with me, and I made it through. And the time before that, and the time before that, and right now. And every time we find ourselves in that place, we might do well to hear the songs of Isaiah chapter 40 and remember the comfort that God promises us. Remember that we are God's sheep and that God is our shepherd and that God picks us up and carries us, whether we're in a new place or an old place. I kind of feel like this song of Isaiah 40 should be the song of the church. It should be a song that we seek to sing to all those who are lost, all those who are hurting, all those who feel like their lives are spinning, all those who are wondering how we're going to make it through this time. Like the beginning of Mark's gospel, it is good news. And it is good news that we should be proclaiming over and over again. for as we remind ourselves in this season of Advent, God is with us. Amen.